So, good morning and welcome to this discussion where we will be discussing business email compromise and email account compromise and the impact thereof. IOCA and Proofpoint welcomes you for today's discussion and thank you for your time for joining us in this webinar. Proofpoint will be leading the discussion for us. IOCA is a platinum partner for Proofpoint in South Africa, and we are very excited about this partnership. The reason why we are excited for this partnership is due to the fact that Proofpoint's core message is that of a people-centric security approach, and we very much believe in that same storyline because of what we can see in the market happening is that people are becoming the new perimeter for our environments. With that, the panel today consists of myself, Chris Visagi. I'm a product manager in one of the IOCA business units, and I specialize in security and IT operations. And from Proofpoint, we welcome David Kingsland, which is a named account manager, specifically for the EMEA region and South Africa. Khalid Shewak, which is a senior systems engineer at Proofpoint. Andrew Rose, which is the Proofpoint resident CISO. Welcome, guys, and thank you for the time as well for enlightening us into this new wave of things that's happening. And David, team, if you could please detail to us how we could stop the next phase of email threats coming into the environment.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Chris, and welcome everybody. Really excited to present to you all Proofpoint's vision of how we approach business email compromise and email account compromise. I think there's no better way than starting such a discussion, if my slides move on, by talking about a real-world example. So for the next few slides, myself and Andrew are going to talk to you about some of the things that we have seen in the industry, and Andrew's going to give some real-world insights. But very quickly, if we first look at how business email compromise is a real issue. There is lots of cases around the world, and as I say, there's nothing better than a story where this example of Pathé, who is a media company based in the Netherlands, that not only resulted in a loss of 19 million euros, it actually led to the dismissal of the CEO, the CFO, and one of the other security directors. Following that, there was another case of a wrongful dismissal, as well as someone got sued basically in the courts. But in essence, what we're seeing here is a business email compromise where the fraudster spoofed the CEO and tricked 4 payments to be sent, totaling 19 million euros. So I don't know, Andrew, if you had any other comments to add to that?
I think just to sort of set the scene a little bit is that as a security professional, you often don't worry about this too much. I was a CISO across many industries until just recently, so I joined Proofpoint probably only about 2 months ago. So I'm fresh from the world of being a security professional, and honestly, this is not something that really struck me as a big concern. As a security professional, I worried about ransomware. That was my number one sort of threat. That was the thing I worried about the most: the fact that someone could get into my organization, wipe me out, and then sort of demand money to get me back up again and running. That was my worst case scenario, and I was terrified of that. However, the more I've learned about some business email compromise, the more significant it really is. It's a bigger risk than many security professionals think it is because, one, it's got a really low barrier to entry. The criminals can effectively just spark up a new domain, start sending emails with fake invoices attached and take their chances, and they may well get some money out of this. And it's money straight in their pocket, very low technical barrier to entry. But they can also make a great deal of money out of this. 19 million euros here. Quite often you would think that that's unsustainable as a security professional. I would think, how on earth could you do that? How can you make so much money from just sending in a fake email? And it's because there's a complexity within organizations. The financial processes you have in place, and not just one person picks up an invoice and works it all the way through. If the first person picks up that fake email and passes it on to the next person, it comes with a degree of credibility. The person says, well, I always receive emails from that person in finance and I always pay them and it's fine. So suddenly that concept of zero trust is gone. They start to trust these things pick up sort of momentum as they go through the organization. So actually you can end up making pretty significant payments relatively easily. And often this isn't even in the view of the security professional. This is all done in the finance team. Now, I have a personal story of experience where we actually had, I'll come back to it a little later, but I actually one of my organizations paid out in this. And I didn't even get notified of this payment, this problem, until after it had been paid. It only came to the security team at that point. So we need to think about the disconnect between finance organizations, an enterprise, and the security organization. And the finance guys aren't aware of this, that this is a problem at all. And the security guys aren't aware of the scale of the problem. So the two haven't quite connected. And this is where we need to bring attention to this topic, because that will be able to ensure that security professionals can start to react to this appropriately.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Yeah, I think I've certainly worked with a number of customers who have joined Proofpoint now, and they have explained to me how there are some cases where the fraud cost is quite low. You know, it is 20, 30, going up to about $100,000. And in those cases, they don't actually let authorities know. But there are cases where, especially these ones that are on screen, that are more in the media. So what we've got here is just reporting. These are reported losses that are known since 2015. $26 billion is lost. And it's a growing thing. I know there's one that Lazio is a great example, because this is a football payment transfer. You know, when players are being bought and sold, you know, someone jumped into the middle here. You know, there was an email chain going on, and the attacker jumped into the middle and was able to try and sell a player for 1.75 million euros.
I think with that one, it was the final payment, because it was the transfer of Stefan de Vries. And he was moving from Lazio to another club, and the payment was scheduled over a period of time. And the scammer managed to get in place just before the final payment was made and say, actually, we've updated our account details. Can you please pay this final payment into this account rather than this one? And they did. And suddenly 1.75 million euros has gone straight into the pocket of a criminal. And then it leaves the great tension between the two football clubs. Then it's like, well, I promised to pay you this amount. Yeah. I expected to receive this amount. Who's going to pay this loss? Because you've actually paid the amount, but you paid it to the wrong place. Who's at loss at that point? Who's responsible for that gap in the payment? And that brings a tension conversation between the two.
Because maybe at some point you might have to come to an agreement with the organization and say, okay, let's split this 50-50. Or if it's a supplier you're working with and you're trying to, you know, build a relationship or keep a relationship, you as the people that have sent their money to the wrong place, are you willing just to spend that money again for the sake of the relationship with your supplier?
It really is. It's a big liability concern that people should think through. I know lots of organizations have thought through, what would we do if we had a ransomware demand? Would we pay? Would we not? What's our policy on this? But very few organizations have thought through any policy on what happens in these sort of situations. And in fact, what you see is cyber liability insurance, which is now becoming a bigger thing generally. That's the biggest payout. This is the biggest payout that they do. It's not about all those other cyber attacks. It's all about these losses, these scams that happen where payment is made, is misdirected. That's where cyber insurance is starting to sort of actually play a part in trying to cover these gaps. So it's something worth thinking about as organizations start to think about cyber liability. This is the use case. This is the major use case for it.
Absolutely. And these figures aren't going away. In 2018, this figure of losses were about 1.3 billion. So in 2019, increasing. And it's just really showing that these attacks are increasing, and the losses that we're seeing are directly related to people. They aren't attacking the infrastructure. These attacks are going after the people to make a mistake, to make that transfer, rather than, you know, trying to jailbreak an iPhone or get through a firewall. As Andrew said earlier, it's a lot lower level, easier, lower cost.
It is. It's low barrier to entry, but the scale is stunning. The FBI released figures to say that the total cost of these sort of scams over the past 3 years has totaled up to $26 billion. $26 billion. Just say that again. Over 3 years, yes, but still $26 billion. And with this rate of increase, as you can see, it's not going anywhere. It's around as a problem. And you have to think that that $26 billion is only the figures that the FBI have been made aware of. So how many people have paid out? How many people have paid these scams and either not realized or realized later and just sort of brushed it under the table and just said, oh, it was a financial fraud, or labeled it as something else because they're embarrassed. It's a huge problem. And that's what's really surprised me over the past couple of months, learning more about this topic, is that ransomware is always our priority, but actually this is just as bad and actually more prevalent, and actually more likely to happen to an organization as well.
Yeah, and I'm certainly seeing a more interested in email account compromise as well, because once the attacker is in, once they've got the keys to your castle, they can do all sorts. It's not so much just about stealing the money with a business email compromise. It's just being in that account, doing the reconnaissance work to then maybe have mails forwarded on, or just look at diaries to then sit there to then decide to make the business email compromise piece. So just looking now really at the two main threats of these business email compromise and email account compromise. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Khalid, to run this through with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. So just to switch gears here and just give you an idea of what the threats are. So email fraud generally leads to two main types of threats. So one is BEC, which is normally known as business email compromise. And this is where the threat actor is actually trying to pretend to be you, to compromise your customers, your partners, your supply chain. And then the other one is referred to as EAC, which is email account compromise. It's more of a technical compromise, but this is where threat actors are actually, they are you, so that the customer receives emails thinking that they're from a trusted provider. And really, BEC and AAC, they're intertwined, but the way the FBI reports against this is they look at these scams as a single crime type. And the idea from the threat actor here is to use social engineering techniques. And what they're really trying to do is solicit money out of you as an organization. And that's the main goal, and also to steal information as well. David, if you could build up the next slide. Perfect. Okay. So what is BEC? So another phrase for BEC is really identity deception. And what threat actors are doing are using a number of different techniques to actually compromise your account, so they want to pretend to be you. So one is domain spoofing. The other one is display name spoofing. Another technique they use is lookalike domains. So what is domain spoofing? So this is where threat actors are actually hijacking your domain. And what they're doing is sending fraudulent emails to your employees, your partners, your customers, and they're using the benefit of your brand. So what customers need to do here is put some controls in place, because if you're not putting controls in place, then anyone can use your trusted domain to send messages out pretending to be you. And with regards to display name spoofing, so display name, this is when attackers are using and spoofing your executive, so pretending to be the CEO or CFO. And the way they do this is they'll modify the from field. So to an outside user, when they receive a mail, they'll look at the from field and they'll recognize the name of the CFO, CEO, and they actually believe that that's the person. But actually it could be, underlying that could be a Gmail account, a Yahoo account, or a Hotmail account. And then you've got the other type of technique that they use where threat actors register a domain that looks like yours. So what they might do is register a domain. Instead of using the letter L, they'll use a number 1. Instead of using the letter 0, they'll a letter O, they'll use a 0. So very, very clever ways in which they can actually bring up a domain very, very quickly, send out mails, pretending to be you. And so these are the type of techniques that they're using.
And Khaled, I was talking to one of my large construction company customers the other day, and we were discussing this. We were looking at display name spoofing, and you're saying, look, through the awareness training that they do, it's actually not too bad looking at the display name spoofing, because you can hover over the email, and actually you can see, oh, the from field's different to the to field kind of thing. So you can quite clearly see that although it says the CEO, it's actually from a Gmail account. But what was interesting was that we were looking at the lookalike domains, and there is a Russian letter, the letter N, is very, very similar to the English alphabet letter N, but they're different. And you cannot see with the naked eye the difference between them. It's just really interesting looking at that and how it's come about that the attackers will use different characters from different languages to try and spoof you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, using things like the Cyrillic alphabet, which is more prevalent in Russia and those kinds of things. If you're not paying attention, you don't recognize the changes. And it becomes even more difficult if you're on a mobile device. So who checks, on the mobile device, it's a small screen. So you look at the display name and you recognize that mail as a trusted user sending you that, and then you move forward. So obviously, what we're trying to do is enlighten you on things like user awareness training, so you can recognize those things and take those additional steps to make sure those emails are coming from who you think they are.
I mean, this is the sort of lowest barrier to entry piece, and this is the classic CEO fraud that we used to hear of a couple of years ago. And it is possible with some sensible controls and some good staff awareness to actually put a good level of control against this and actually prevent the vast majority of these. The issue is when it moves on to the next phase, EAC, suddenly all the controls and the education you've put in place with your staff don't work very well anymore, and it gets a lot more difficult. So if you could walk us through EAC, then I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the additional threats that come from this.
Yeah, no, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, absolutely. So EAC, so let's have a look at what this is. So as I said, this is when threat actors are actually becoming you. It's a technical compromise. So what they're trying to do is break into your account and compromise your credentials. So they're using a various number of techniques. They'll use password sprays, phishing type emails, malware. So with password sprays, they'll use brute force techniques. They'll try and guess your username and password, and they'll use it again and again and again to try and break into your account and guess your passwords. Phishing emails, very, very difficult to identify those because there's no malicious URLs, there's no attachments. It's just very clever wording with timeframes and monetary benefit to try and get you to do something. And then you've got malware. And with malware, it may be they've downloaded some keyloggers or stealers, and they're trying to compromise you. And once they've got into your account, and now they are you. So once they have that information, actually they don't only just have information to your email, but they'll have access to your calendars, your key meetings with suppliers, your customers, your corporate directory, so they know who people internally are, so they'll do internal phishing. They'll attack your supply chain with BEC type phishing emails. And also what they'll do is they'll take data out of the business as well. So again, very, very clever ways of actually doing this. So it's just not email that's compromised, it's your whole account and your persona that's compromised.
This is where it starts to get pretty terrifying. I mean, if you think about the example I said at the start about ransomware being a worst case scenario for an organization, actually EAC is the start of that ransomware attack path. So if they can get access to an account, then the first thing they'll do is they'll try and pretend to be the CFO and try and initiate some payments. They'll try and pretend to be a user and say, actually, I've just changed my bank details. Please redirect my salary to this account for this month. They'll try and pretend to be the CEO and say, please buy some gift cards for my staff and then send me the numbers. I want to make it a nice surprise for everybody. And because those emails turn up from the real email account with the real email footer on, they've got immediate credibility. And so many organizations, they just don't want to change the way of working to actually question every email that comes in from every member of staff. So it becomes difficult to sort of pick up on these. And that's why it's so much more difficult to pick up on an EAC attack than a BEC attack, because you have to question the validity of every email that you receive. And that's just not conducive to good business. The second phase, though, is that once they've got this foothold and got access to a user account, as is mentioned there, they can start to steal data. And they steal data and they can take that out of the organization. And suddenly you're most of the way down to a ransomware 2.0 attack, because the next phase is for them to plant ransomware. If they plant ransomware, that can destroy your organization. And suddenly you're getting an email saying, we've planted ransomware, we've stolen all your data, please pay us $10 million. And that's not an uncommon figure. So actually, EAC becomes a leading indicator of a much more serious attack on your organization. If you can detect and stop EAC attacks, then you're stopping a longer attack path that can end up with hugely damaging sort of repercussions for the enterprise. So EAC is actually so much more important than you may think. It's not just about, oh, well, we'll save $80,000 here and $90,000 here from a bit of fraud. No, this could end up in a $10 million ransomware attack on the organization. So it's really important that you're able to pick up and detect these and close them down as rapidly as possible.
Yeah, I've just had a thought of a recent threat that I've seen. It's very low level, very low entry, and the threat actor is pretending to be somebody in marketing or sales and saying, I'm out of the office, and they're emailing the PA and saying, oh, could you go and buy me $300 worth of gift cards? And can you take pictures of those and send me the code so I can send them out to the sales force? So it's a low level, small amount, but they've built that trust. And then they use that again and again and again. So it doesn't have to be very sophisticated. It can be quite low level.
It can. It's the thing that challenges me as a CISO is the fact that how the hell do you stop this? Once they've got the legitimate account, if every time I received an email from the CEO telling me to do something, I had to phone him up and say, you sent me an email. Was that really you? That just undermines the whole confidence in all communication across the enterprise. It means that the enterprise just slowly grinds to a halt as every communication has to be double checked. It becomes really challenging to really keep on running your business effectively if you put the controls in place internally to stop this. So you have to make sure that you stop this at root. You stop these EAC attacks happening through applying controls that actually prevent them and detect them really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. David, could you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, and really this slide is talking about the fact that once the threat actors in your organization, they've got access to your corporate email. But then what I've also heard of stories where a threat actor is communicating through a corporate email system to the end user, the recipient, and saying, oh, I've just sent you a document. It's not getting through to you because your gateway security is blocking that. Can you give me your personal email address and I'll send it there? So people then share their personal email address, and then those documents come through to personal email, which is on a corporate machine. And when they open those attachments, for example, malware gets loaded, keyloggers get loaded. So again, you've compromised. So they're using multiple different techniques. And not only that, they're also using your access to your cloud applications as well. So if your mobile phone, any apps that you may have downloaded which are unauthorized, they have access to your corporate credentials. And then the whole concept around the web as well, where people are logging on to malicious links, which are benign, but then turn bad. So how do you protect against that? And then you got the whole attack surface of your supply chain as well, which is all built around trust. So I don't know if you've got any comments, Andrew or David, around supply chain compromise.
Well, let me talk you through my example then, because my example was an EAC example. And one of the firms I worked for, what happened is that they wrote to us, the supplier, and said, actually, you owe us money for this invoice, which we did. And they said, we've changed our banking details. Here's the bank you should now pay it into. And we wrote back going, are you sure this is a bit unusual? And they went, no, it's fine. And we checked, and emails went back and forward validating, is this the number? Yes, it is, absolutely. When are we going to pay? We're going to pay then. So lots of communication went back and forth, all very legitimate. We paid the invoice. And then a month later, the company got in touch and said, when are you going to pay this invoice? And we were like, well, we already have. And here's the evidence we've got that we paid. And here's the emails from you telling us where to pay it. And they went quiet for a day or two, and then they came back to us and said, it looks like our Outlook web access has been hacked and someone's been actually on our network pretending to be us and sending emails as us. So we'd paid in good faith to the supplier based on the emails that we'd received from them. They hadn't received the email, they hadn't received those communications because basically they'd come back into the gateway. The criminal had been working out of hours because they were half around the world from us, and they deleted all those emails and the sent items and inboxes before the real person could see them. And we paid money directly to the criminal. Fortunately, it was less than 100,000 euros. So as David mentioned earlier, we split it 50-50 because we still wanted to have a good relationship with this supplier. But that cost us, 50,000 euros worth of additional cost. It cost them a lot of embarrassment and cost them 50,000 euros too. So it is a concern that they can slip into your supply chain. There's an element of trust again between those the two parties there. An invoice comes through. It's a real invoice. I really want to pay it, but suddenly you're paying it to the wrong person. You're having a conversation with the wrong person, and you don't realize that. So it's a challenge, and it's an expensive challenge, and it's a growing challenge as well. Email is where all these problems come from. I think we see about 94% of all cyber attacks come down that email channel. It is the prevalent attack vector of criminals. That's what they use. It's easy. And actually, I think it's 99% of attacks leverage human activity. So they want someone to click on something, to open something. The users or the attackers have looked at the networks now, and they've actually seen that the job security professionals have done is pretty good. The firewalls are good. The intrusion detection systems are good. All of those things are pretty good now. So actually the easiest way to get into an enterprise and to monetize that access is to use the human aspect. Can you break in via the human? Because if you can get their credentials, then suddenly that great encryption that they put on the database is worthless because the account goes straight past the encryption, straight into the data. All that monitoring is worthless because you're going in as a legitimate user at a legitimate time. So it doesn't flag it as being unusual. So I do really believe that what we talk about at Proofpoint about people being the new enterprise perimeter is very true. You need to have this people-centric perspective because that's where the criminals are pivoted to. They're now looking at our enterprises as a collection of individuals rather than a collection of technology. And we need to ensure that we've upgraded and updated our security perspective on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. So what David just showing you on the screen there, so there's no one single product that you can buy that will solve this problem for you. So it's got to be a layered approach, and there's no silver bullet, but at the heart of all this is your people, because that's who threat actors are now targeting. Understanding who they are, what are their job roles, what are they doing. So as a solution, the way this can build out is for business email compromise, you're looking to put security in place at the gateway, but also authentication. And I'll come back to authentication. How do you authenticate and protect your brand, your domain? And how do you legitimize email coming from you? The other side is email account compromise. And that's where you need to put controls in place around your cloud applications, your web interfaces. Are users using the web correctly? Are they checking, is HTTPS being used in place? So these kinds of attacks occur that way. And then visibility. Visibility is all around who's been attacked. It's not necessarily, for example, the CEO, CFO, the senior security people within your organization, but it might be somebody who has access to the crown jewels. And then you've got remediation. So what happens when something does get through? You want to have automatic remediation where you can reach into the user's mailboxes and delete those malicious emails automatically so that you're protecting them immediately. You also may want to, as a remediation method, force a password reset. So if that is an EAC attack and the account's been compromised, then once you've identified that, you want the legitimate user to reset their password. And then you've got a whole combination of these solutions together. So you have to look at it holistically around the whole suite, say, okay, we need to put layers of protection in to make sure we're protecting our users. And the one in the middle there also is very important. Your users become your last line of defense as well. So education around understanding and identifying these kinds of phishing emails. And I think I just noticed in the chat, one of our colleagues has mentioned that if you're going to do any money transfers, sometimes, depending on what it is, you do need to pick up the phone and speak to the person and say, I'm about to make this money transfer. Just want to double check, was that you? But then as Andrew said as well, if you have to do that for every single email, then it becomes unmanageable as well.
And also, you're going to question your CFO when he's just told you he's going to jump on a flight, and you try and call him, and lo and behold, his mobile phone's off, because the attacker knows that that person is going to be on a flight because he's seen his calendar. So very, very challenging.
And one of the things, the latest sort of scams that we're seeing, which Devesh, you asked about in chat there, is we've also seen examples of them starting to use deepfake technology to leave voicemails. So actually you'll get an email come through, and then you'll get a voicemail trying to mimic the voice of the CFO, which they can fake from getting, seeing a webcast of them or seeing them on YouTube. And so they can start to create a voice print and use that to create a fake voicemail. So now what you're getting is you're getting an email from the CFO and a voicemail from the CFO saying, I just sent you an email. It's really urgent. I'm about to get on a flight. Please make sure this is paid by the time I get off. It's really compelling. When a CEO fraud turned up and it's poorly misspelt, bad grammar coming from a Gmail account, it's pretty easy to spot that one and go, okay, I'm not going to pay this. But this stuff, it starts to get really difficult. You need to have better technologies and better education in place to be able to protect against this.
Yeah, absolutely. So David, what we'll do now is we'll talk about Proofpoint and how Proofpoint does it uniquely and how we do it better. And so there'll be some context around how we do that. So one of the things you can see there, whatever solution you put in place is you want to have effective solutions. So what we do at Proofpoint is we detect and block these imposter type emails, and they're quite sophisticated, and I'll show you on the next couple of slides how we do that. But the whole goal here is to have a system in place where you can identify these imposters, you can dynamically update. So as we get more threat intelligence coming into our networks and our sensors around the world, we're able to automatically and dynamically update these classifiers so that we're always one step ahead of the threat actors. And from an authentication viewpoint, you want to make sure that your domain is trusted and you've got Dmarc in place. So all the procedures you need to do to make sure that it's a legitimate domain, you've got full control. And I've worked with customers where they will only communicate with their suppliers. So if they're a financial institution, they'll only work with suppliers who also have Dmarc in place so that they're authenticated at both ends. So again, it depends on the level of the sophistication you want around that. But the whole idea again is to prevent domain spoofing. And looking at display names, lookalike domains, domain spoofing, a lot of that is going to be around education as well, and putting in systems in place so that we can identify a newly registered domain. And if that domain's only been up for about, let's say, 2 weeks, then the reputation of that domain is low. So again, we look at reputations of those domains. But if it's a brand and it's been around for many, many years, it'll have a very high reputation. So again, understanding that kind of thing. And threat actors will register domains maybe a month before the attack so that they can build up some credibility on the domain. And then they'll use that domain to do to launch that attack. And the whole idea also is obviously to secure your reputation and your brand. David, anything you want to add on that?
No, not on that part.
Okay, so let's just switch gears here again as well. And what I'm going to do, just give you some insight into underneath the covers and what we're doing here to actually look at these imposters and understand what's actually going on here. So a lot of our competition, they still use very much the traditional approach. So they've got silos of information. They're testing users with maybe once a month, they'll send out a test email and everybody recognizes that test email. So they all pass. But does that really challenge the user to actually identify that phishing email? They have lots of static rules in place and making updates is quite laborious. So at Proofpoint, we have what we refer to as an imposter classifier. It's a machine learning algorithm. It's called the Proofpoint Stateful Composite Scoring Service. So it's quite a complex name, but we refer to it as the imposter classifier. And what we're doing here is we're developing a baseline. understanding the reputation of the sender, what IP is it coming from. So suddenly, if you look at the data within the headers and the IP is registered in China and you don't do any business in China, but they're pretending to be in Johannesburg or in Cape Town or Port Elizabeth, that's a trigger. We look at the relationship between the sender and the recipient. And then we look at the content as well. And we're always self-learning, and this algorithm is dynamic. So it adapts very, very quickly. And that's the intelligence and the core behind the platform, and how we're actually trying to identify these imposters, because they are quite challenging to try and identify all those facets to make sure that it's a legitimate email. And then authenticating your email. So David, maybe you can mention a few things here. So at Proofpoint with regards to Dmarc, now Dmarc is a process that companies are going through. A lot of companies are looking at their domains and want to make sure that they're authenticating correctly. So we have quite an extensive team of professional services consultants who are world-class in their capabilities, and they do this day in, day out. And I think we're one of the largest teams of those professional services. And I think, David, they were brought in as an acquisition a number of years ago.
Yeah, so we actually purchased the company that founded the Dmarc standard, and along with that came their professional services team, and since then we have grown that to the world's largest professional services team of Dmarc experts that spend day in, day out purely looking to legitimize your email domain. As you know, it's easy to spoof a real domain. If you don't have a Dmarc record, or if you haven't gone through the Dmarc journey, anyone in the world can pretend to be you and send that to your supply chain, etc. So the whole point of this service is to go through a process of just finding the real senders of your brand. Who is sending from you that you want to allow. And once you identify all of the correct senders, you then go into a process of just blocking all the others. If it's not done correctly, it's an extremely dangerous tool, because you will stop legitimate email. But if done correctly, it is probably one of the most powerful ways of guaranteeing that your email is only being used by legitimate senders. Really cool thing to be able to stand up in front of the board and say, hey, if our customers get an email from us, we know that it is actually from us. Whereas unless you've gone through this journey, you can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the other side, just to give you some idea as well, we have unique visibility. And what I mean by that is we're processing over 5 billion emails on a daily basis. We're also getting threat feeds from 7,000 plus security email gateway environments. And we're also getting feedback from ISPs as well. So this whole streams of data that we're getting, so we're able to legitimize and understand what the mail flow is, what's the connections, who's trusted, who's not, and be able to identify that. And that's all that intelligence is then automatically integrated into our gateway. And because we've got that capability, we have the flexibility to adapt those policies if we need to very, very quickly. Because a lot of the other static approaches are very binary. It's either on or off, and you need that flexibility to adapt all the time.
And I know it says 7,000 segs there, but that's the enterprise level secure email gateways. When you look at the total volume of Proofpoint customers, it's about 120,000 customers that we have globally. So there's a lot more secure email gateways than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so let's look at cloud applications. Now, I really like this slide because what it does, it gives you some visibility into your users. So, for example, who are your very attacked people? So we have a term at Proofpoint called VAPs, very attacked people, not necessarily the same people who are your VIPs, because they have access to lots of data and they have credentials and can go different places on the network. So what we're able to do is to see who they are, when they're logging in, whether there's any suspicious logins. Are they logging in from the world map and they're pretending to be somebody who's in South Africa, but they're logging in from Ukraine? So why is that an indicator? What kind of phishing attempts are coming in? What files are they accessing? So is that on OneDrive? Is that on Google Drive? What applications are coming in? So by doing this, we can put controls in place so that we can terminate that session. We can suspend the user. We can get them to, if there's some integration with some things like Okta and those other kind of IDP providers, we can integrate with those as well. We can force a password rechange immediately. So the whole idea here is to protect you and protect your people on cloud applications as well as not just email, as Andrew rightly pointed out earlier on. Personal email, cloud applications, mobile devices, so calendar information. So across your network, once your account's been compromised with an EAC attack, then they have access to basically everything because they are you. And here, just you can see here what we're doing in the background. We're looking at devices, what browser are they logging in from, what time are they logging in. We're looking at reputation, we're monitoring, doing behavioral analytics around that. And then we're looking at black and white whitelist countries as well to understand that as well. And we're joining all the dots together. So hopefully giving you a very comprehensive view of your user base.
I think this becomes more important as organizations have sort of moved more to the cloud, especially rapidly because of COVID as well. We've seen lots of organizations accelerating their cloud journey. Having visibility of user activity like this is so useful because users are more susceptible to making mistakes. If they've just been pushed onto Office 365 and they also use other clouds, if they're moving between one cloud and another, one SaaS service is another, and they're asked for an authentication user ID and password, actually most users would not think that to be terribly unusual. They have to do that on a sort of semi-regular basis anyway. So they're actually susceptible to putting in their credentials to what may be a fraudulent gateway and to having that captured. And then suddenly their account is being used. It's logging on at an odd time of night from an odd location. And you just won't have visibility of that. And straight away, you're starting down that EAC path. The credentials have been stolen. The next phase is the data theft. The next phase is the ransomware. So the journey to cloud has actually upped the stakes here and made it easier for the attackers to grab the credentials and leverage them.
Yeah, Andrew, you're completely right. I've had experience with working with customers since this whole COVID situation. As everyone has shifted to Office 365, they are now going, oh, actually, no, I recognize I need to log into 365 more regularly now. And I recognize that I'm getting these multi-factor authentication tokens being sent to me. It's just more common for them. So they're kind of more used to it. So when the attacks do happen, they're, more susceptible.
They just don't know when it's going to happen. You know, if someone sends you a SharePoint link or, a different link from another system, it's not unusual. It's not unexpected for it to go, oh, please validate, please, because this may be from another SharePoint, or perhaps it's a SharePoint you don't have access to, or your credentials have only just been changed. So for the users, they're just not quite sure whether it's right or not. And that element of trust comes back in, especially if it's from an internal account. They'll trust it and go, okay, well, Bob sent this to me. It's probably fine. I'll just put my credentials in, away I go. So it is vitally important. And again, COVID makes this worse, one, because of the acceleration towards the cloud, and two, because of the lack of a support network. So, previously we always had people around us in the office and you could just turn to the next person and go, have you received this email? Do you think this is odd? Can you come and look at my screen? We don't have that anymore. All of those people are now working from home. So you're on your own to try and make these calls on your own. And you may be a little more distracted because you're at home. And so people make mistakes more. So actually, again, the scales have tipped in the favor of the attacker again, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other side of that is web browsing. So what we've got at Proofpoint, we have what we term adaptive controls. And the idea here is to reduce the attack surface for the user. So if people are receiving emails to, for example, their personal webmail, it might be on Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, and others, they can get compromised that way. URLs can be sent to them. So we're rewriting those URLs. We're integrating them with our TAP dashboard as well to make sure that we're aware of what those links are, what those threats are. But then you've got the whole idea of non-work browsing. So people are using their corporate machines, but browsing the internet, and they may be going to websites where they're trying to download malware in the background. There may be vendor contractor isolation. So if you've got vendors or contractors that come into your network to do some work, you want to be able to isolate their sessions. So if they are going out onto the web, how do you control that? How do you monitor that? Are there any exceptions? So again, protecting your users both from an email viewpoint, but also browser. So one of the things a lot of customers do is they'll get a URL in an email, but instead of clicking on it, they'll cut and paste it into the browser. But then again, all they've done is transfer that threat, possible threat, into the browser. And then what we do in the background is do real-time scanning of those destination URLs to make sure, is that a legitimate website that's going? Because with web, you can do redirects and those kinds of things. So suddenly you think you're going to a certain website, but in the background it's redirecting you to another landing page with saying, oh, we've just lost your credentials. Can you just type in your username and password again? And that way they've compromised you. So again, very, very clever techniques that they use, and we're always adapting to that. Then one of the other things, so what David just showing you there on the screen there is give you visibility into your users. So again, who are your users that are being attacked? What are their roles? What type of attacks are occurring? Are they credential phishing? Are they, for example, rat tools where they're doing remote access tools onto your device? Are they banking Trojans? And what we're doing is we're identifying individuals and we're creating an attack index for those users. And what I mean by that is, who are they? Are they campaigns? Are they individually being attacked? What are their roles? So it may be a junior systems engineer, but actually that person has access to the customer database. So again, they're trying to compromise those individuals. And the way people find out who somebody is these days, they're looking at LinkedIn, they're looking at Google, they're looking at any events they may have presented at, and they're building a picture of these people, and then they know who they are, and then they can go and attack those. So with the dashboard, we're giving you unique visibility. And one of the things there on the screen there, can you see where it's got the number 5? We've got their risky third-party applications. So those are mobile devices. So what apps are you downloading, or are you allowed to download on your device? And why is suddenly that application wanting access to your contacts, your camera, your speaker? So again, a lot of companies are saying, well, actually those third-party applications are compromising our network. We're not going to allow them. And those can be put in an exception list or blocked immediately.
I think one of the key things there about those application pieces, there's a couple of things on this slide. One is the fact that this gives the security professional really great actionable intelligence. Being able to see who your attacked people are and what they're being attacked with is really actionable, because you can look at that and you can make assumptions based on it. If they're continually attacking your PR department, it's like, okay, what have our PR department got that the attackers want? If they're continually attacking your research department, okay, that makes sense. You can say, okay, well, perhaps we know what they're after. And that enables you to change your security controls to adapt to protect your people, especially if you can see who they're after and what tools they're using to attack them. But this third-party application piece, I think, is critically important as well, because this again is relatively new information for me as a CISO, and it relates to the Office 365 world. What we're saying here is there are applications out there which will pretend to be legitimate applications. So from Office 365, the one I saw recently was a SharePoint one. And so effectively you click on a link in an email, which looks like here's a document a colleague has shared with you. It takes you to the legitimate Office 365 page, and it says, actually, to access this document, you need this SharePoint plugin. And it looks entirely legitimate. Please click on here to access the document. The only thing that gives it away is the fact it's from microsoftonline.com. And so it's from a different URL. It's a different application. If you click to give this application access to your Office 365 account, you're dead in the water. You've given it root level access into your Office 365 account. Changing your password won't help. Putting multi-factor authentication in place won't help. You've given this core level access to Office 365. And so this is bypassing all of those great controls and authentication pieces. So third-party applications like this are a real new trend that we're seeing that are really risky for organizations who've moved to the cloud.
Yeah. And I was just looking at the chat, and I think somebody just asked a question around rewritten URLs. So the performance is very low. As the emails come through on the gateway, before they get delivered to the user in their mailbox, we've already looked at that mail and rewritten those URLs so that when a user then clicks on those URLs, we've got preempt sandboxing of those URLs, but then we also do real-time sandboxing of those URLs as well. So depending on what the destination website is, we're allowing the user to immediately interact with that website. But in the background, we're sandboxing and we're disabling any add-ins or COM DLLs or anything else that might be trying to do something in the background. So once we deem that website to be safe, we'll then give full control to the user. So it becomes very seamless to the user, but a totally valid question.
Yeah, performance is really low on those, you know, on rewriting the URLs in the email and also on the browser isolation piece. You know, it's a matter of seconds.
Okay, and so then remediation. So because threats are so unique, and you've got to protect yourself from those zero-day threats. So those unique URLs, those unique attacks coming through that nobody's seen across the world. So those mails will get through to users. So there'll always be a case of emails getting through to users. So what do you do from a remediation viewpoint? So one of the things you want to be able to do is once you've identified that, you want to be able to leverage your users, for example, as well. So on the screen there, on the left-hand side, you've got here what we refer to as Phish Alarm. So that's a nice little add-in that can be deployed to your users in their mailbox. And what a user can do is if they receive an email and they think it's suspicious, they can click the Phish Alarm button, and that will then report that mail to the SOC to say, I think this is possibly a phishing email. So what the SOC will do, will leverage and analyze that email and determine, is it a false positive? Is it a phishing attack? If it is, we'll leverage our threat intelligence network globally. And if we've identified it, we'll then quarantine that email. We'll do an incident on that email, and then we can reach into the user's mailbox and delete that phishing email directly. But not only that, if that email has gone through to, let's say, 10 other people within your business, we can automatically, through remediation, remove it out of their mailboxes as well. So it's a very effective way of being able to, post-delivery, delete those phishing emails. And we're getting continuous feeds globally from our sensors into the threat intelligence network. So if there is another company globally who's also being targeted with that kind of threat, and we've identified that, we are aware of that threat. So we can then reach into your users' mailboxes and delete that automatically through the permissions model that you've set up. But this is the whole idea around what do you do? And I do ask the questions when I talk to my customers, what happens when you get a compromised email? So what tends to happen, it's gone to the SOC or the security team. They have to create an incident. They then have to track the user down. Then they have to legitimize that, and that can take hours. And it's a very manual process. So you want to be able to move to a place where you can leverage the technology you have and control it that way.
Yeah, kind of what I really like about this as well is you know, I mentioned earlier we've got 100 odd thousand customers globally. It's like you said, if any one of our customers like hits this Phish Alarm button, they're going to help the rest of the community. So you know, if IBM or if Palo Alto, both Proofpoint customers, if they were to click this button and you as an organization too had this same email, then you know they're in essence doing some security work for you. That's one of the things I love about it.
Okay, and then the other piece within the whole suite that of technology that you need to prevent BEC, EAC type attacks is user education. So you want to educate your users to identify those phishing emails with real world examples. So you want it to be very quick. So you want to make use of things like the Phish Alarm button where users can click within seconds an email and say, this is a phishing email, and they'll protect the rest of your organization as well. And you can customize these, you can make them. So one of the things we do with education is we take real world examples that are coming through that we're seeing happening in the world, and using that as a training simulation for your users as well. So that we're testing them, we're reporting to you that these are your top clickers. So these are people within your business who are always clicking on links. So maybe you need to target very customized training for those people. So you kind of build up a top 10 list of who in your business is always clicking on malicious links. That's always enlightening, because sometimes you get people on that list and you think, well, that person should know better, but they're actually always clicking on links. So that's an interesting one as well.
The serial clickers, as I call them, yes.
Okay. And I'll let you just build this one out there, David, if there's anything you want to comment on this.
I think, Khalid, I think the picture is really explaining it quite well. With this strategy with Proofpoint, there is a consolidation play. There isn't a silver bullet to solving business email compromise and email account compromise, but there's certainly a better way of doing it. And that's obviously Proofpoint is able to service our customers, reduce the number of vendors that they are working with, but also, you will be working with a global vendor with hundreds of thousands of customers around the world. And we really are the only vendor that can provide this integrated end-to-end solution that addresses the very complex business email account problem holistically. And yeah.
I mean, it is about the fact that, just to reiterate, the attackers have pivoted. They have pivoted away from just attacking technologies, and they are now looking at the human aspect. That's the perimeter that they're focusing on, and that's the area that we focus on. How can we ensure that we protect your staff as best as possible? How can we ensure that they don't receive the threats that are coming down, the 94% of attacks that come down email? How can we stop those at source? How can we ensure that the people are really good at recognizing those threats and not clicking on them? How can we protect the data that sits behind your staff? And how can we recognize any compromises that have happened to highlight them to you as soon as possible to prevent the attackers moving down that attack chain to not just start financial fraud, but then plant more malicious software and actually end up in a much worse case scenario?
Yeah, and a really good question that just came up in the chat as well. So I do talk to a lot of customers who have moved to Office 365. They've got EOP from Microsoft, and they've got ATP from Microsoft as well. And their feeling is, okay, we've gone wholeheartedly across to Microsoft and we're protected. But actually, Microsoft is very much an infrastructure company. It's not it didn't generically come from a security base. So it does provide a level of security, but what I'm finding is a lot of our customers are actually complementing their Office 365 estate with Proofpoint, because they realize there are gaps within Office 365, and it does let through a lot of malicious emails. I think the latest report we looked at was there was something like 53% of all threats originate from Microsoft's platform. So as a threat actor, all I need is a credit card. I can log on and create an account on Office 365, and then I can use that as my platform for launching attacks. So OneDrive, email, all these platforms, that's where those threats come from. And Microsoft's not even looking at their own platform to protect. So it's quite interesting when you have that conversation with customers, and they find that actually a lot of the threats are originating from Microsoft's own platform, which is trusted. So what do you do in that scenario? So you've got to have a complementary solution in place for that.
And that's why, Khalid, Proofpoint, we will always start investigating any URL that is hosted in Microsoft, because unfortunately, we just can't trust it. As you say, 55% of all bad URLs and bad emails are actually originating in Microsoft. So that is actually where we draw to a close. So we should really start to look at questions. and answer session if people have more questions, or if
Yeah, I
Chris, you
think we've
have
answered
some
a lot of those questions as we've gone along. If anybody's got a
chat.
question, by all means, Chris, we can pick them up. No problem.
Yeah, so it's just I just want to make one comment. Well, thanks to the panel from Proofpoint. Definitely something to think about, and thanks for making it quite clear. However, from a South African perspective, we are on the bottom end of Africa. You might think that we are safe and protected because we're on the bottom of the world, and we aren't. So one of my colleague and myself, we're currently doing research in support of some of the other stuff we do. And for some of the people joining us, South Africa is currently the third highest number of has got the third highest number of cyber attacks globally. Now, we don't know about all of them. We've only seen the recent ones like Experian and these types of attacks. But there are much more that we don't know, which is potentially not reported. So it's definitely a South African problem. As well as another metric that we came across was that South African organizations is currently suffering 577 malware attacks an hour. Now that is significant, and that is something that Andrew spoke of earlier about, malware, the moment that it comes in, it starts escalating, and you get more access to the rest of the environment. So it's definitely also relevant in South Africa, whether we want to believe it or acknowledge it or not. So it is important that we look at these things and put it into our context. So thanks. The only question I can see, and maybe Khalid, you can answer this, is or did you already, the real-time user blocking can only work for new OIDC or OAuth sessions. Won't we be able to block on existing sessions?
Yeah, so we're doing some more work on that because OAuth authorization is also now being targeted by threat actors who know that technology, and they're able to compromise and insert themselves within the OAuth session as well. So we've got some protections in place for that as well, but that's an evolving attack surface as well. So we're always trying to stay one step ahead of that as well.
Great. So I don't see any more questions. Anyone else have got a question? Please pose it now. In the meantime, I'd really like to thank David, yourself, Andrew. Thanks for joining us, and Khalid, thank you for joining us and enlightening us into this obviously very large threat actor that's starting to be more visible globally as well.
Yeah, I thank everyone too, and I'd like to finish on just by stating that if there are follow-up questions, please do get in contact with ourselves or with IOCO. We pride ourselves on proving the value of Proofpoint. So we welcome any form of assessments with any customers to demonstrate our capabilities as well, and work with IOCO in helping get that set up.
Yeah, and just to add to what David just said there, so I work with a lot of customers, and they say, well, we're on EOP, we're on ATP, we think we're okay. So what we can do is do an email assessment where we get a copy through a journal of all the emails that are coming through the gateway, and then we're able to give you an idea of the gaps of emails that are getting through EOP and ATP coming into your mailbox that actually Microsoft should have blocked and they haven't. So we give you visibility of stuff that's getting through so that you can then get a real world assessment of, okay, so there is a significant amount of threats getting through which really shouldn't be. And that then creates an additional conversation. But as David said, if you get any further questions, please pass them through and I'll cover those. So I don't know if Andrew's got any final words. That'd be good to hear.
Probably not really. I think I've used all my words up all the way through. But I guess just to close off on what I said, it is an issue that is bigger than most security professionals perceive. It's an issue where finance and security need to come together to sort this out. And actually, it's an issue that becomes that start of that extended attack path, which ends in catastrophe for many organizations. So BEC and EAC are really important issues that security needs to focus on. And as you've seen today, it's not the easiest thing to solve. It's not just a case of a bit more education or just putting a gateway in place. There's several different stages you need to think about. But I'd urge you all to go back to your organizations and have a think about where you are on your maturity journey against that, to see whether you're actually in a decent place to protect your organizations against these threats, because they're not going anywhere. They're escalating. They're growing at sort of hundreds of % a year. And the money goes directly into the criminal's pocket, which enables them to invest in talent, invest in development, and invest in, a bigger criminal enterprises, which makes the whole thing worse again. So to stop this criminal sort of spiral, we really need to make sure that our organizations are as good as protected as possible against these threats. So have a think about what your status is and what your maturity is in that space.
Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, please reach out to me if you've got any more questions, as David and Khalid has offered. My email address is on the invite, so please feel free to reach out to me myself. I will get David as well as Khalid involved if we can't fill it ourselves, but I feel comfortable or confident that we will be able to assist you as well. With that, I think it's just any more questions? Can't see any more.
Nope.
I think that is it. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you all have a good day further.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.